joined by the amazingly named Memes of Destruction. All right, Memes, would you care to introduce yourself for the audience?
Hey folks, how we all doing tonight? Memes of Destruction here. I have been upon these greater YouTubes for a number of years now apparently going on a decade on a number of different forms, and this is the most recent occurrence. Also because at the time, the memes of production in all its relevant forms were mostly taken, so I'm like, well, sometimes before creation, there must be destruction. So I chose to do this, and not just trying to engage in the battle of ideas, and been doing some little IRL ventures and stuff just because I live up in the greater New England area. So the president came to town. I did a few on the ground interviews over there, trying to talk to the crowd and just kind of get different takes from folks protesting, folks there in support. And basically, when we had that little the Straight Pride Parade and the Let's Take Back Our Pride events, I had applied for the city to do a third event. I pitched it as a public option, in that it was the Rally to Restore Sanity and/or Turtles, because politics isn't binary.
Yeah, so I think that may help give our audience a bit of a clue about where you come from politically. But just so it's a bit more clear, how would you describe your politics and your approach to politics?
The difficult question of the day. If anything, I would consider myself more of a pathfinder. And by pathfinder, it's we're kind of like Jedi, except we require more kyber crystals. But as far as in common vernacular, I'd say I'm a liberal Democrat that believes in progress. I wouldn't call myself a progressive, just because I don't think I've earned that credence, or at least according to Kyle Kalinske and the things that he listed, I didn't earn it. So,
well, I wouldn't necessarily listen to Kyle Kalinske for much.
and I'm just using that as a common reference point for folks that may be watching this, and just certain, and that's the thing. That's why it's so difficult to understand another person's entire life story over 140 to 280 characters. I don't know, might be asking a lot.
Yeah, that is actually a good point. Like sometimes I feel like formats like Twitter are kind of just like set up to spark petty discussions with no real substance. Like because of the character limit in Twitter, it kind of actively encourages you to post as little as possible, to engage as little as possible, to keep your arguments short and pointed. Because the format only allows you to tweet 240 characters without creating this long thread that barely anyone is going to read or have the ability to process. So as a result, you've reduced political discussion down to sound bites.
That's what we often did anyways. The big thing that I see right now is just we have the ability to get past that. However, we're kind of adapting as a greater human society to more of this soundbite thing. And what I would reference, and I don't have the exact data right in front of me, but it was about a year ago, I had come across a study. I believe it may have been Teal Deer or somebody that presented it. I'm unsure, but what it cited was adolescent attention span. And the previous about, I think it was 10 years, the attention span for adolescents within this group was approximately 12 seconds. Over the next decade, it's down to 8 seconds. That's just such a significant decline. And these are our young folks and stuff, and this is during formative years. So,
yeah. Well, I think in some respects, like access to technology at a very, very young age can have a very negative effect on attention span, because we live in a world which is constantly trying to sell us something, whether this be a product, an idea, a way of life. You know, it's constant bombardment. Um, or even just as simple as your attention um, is another thing that people try to sell, because time nowadays is money.
it's and any of my friends that may have played World of Warcraft, the goblins have been telling us that for a long time. Time is money, friend.
Yeah. And I feel like in some ways um, that will manifest itself, like the whole soundbite politics thing, it manifests itself in towards a tendency to simplified politics. How can we cram in this complicated philosophy or this complicated problem that the world is facing into 240 characters? Or even, no, that's too much. We don't want to fill out the whole tweet. How can we fit it into a hashtag? How can we fit it into a meme? How can we fit it into an audio clip? How can we fit it into a GIF? It becomes simpler and simpler and simpler.
We're trying to reduce down incredibly complicated, oftentimes very nuanced ideas, and oftentimes a process in a series of ideas into just something that you can put up there and assume that a person that gives it 2.5 seconds will actually continue to look at it and maybe actually click it.
Mm-hmm. And another thing is that I think that the political camps, that whether that be left, right, center, whatever, have kind of become, in a way, cultivated identities. Like, people are less interested in the policies you support and more interested in, are you a Republican or a Democrat?
That dynamic, and I find myself doing that as well. Anytime I'm watching something that's coming from the United States Congress, the Senate, I'm just looking, and whoever's speaking, I always will look down and look for like that little D, that little R, or even an occasional I or something there, or when you occasionally an L, I suppose, not that often recently, but that's the thing. It's like we're trying to frame it because somebody might be saying something, and there is something to this. And Jack Dorsey touched upon this when he was doing his kind of little podcast thing before, when there was this controversy between like him, Joe Rogan, Tim Pool, and stuff. And he was trying to point out certain things. The concept that rather than necessarily following the person, but kind of following the idea in some ways, because it's none of us are perfect. We're all perfectly imperfect human beings. It's just that's our nature. And if you're going to try to, this is something with a lot of the old scriptures I do think they have a point on, is to try to avoid worshiping false idols and everything, just because with humanity, you're going to be let down when it comes to the individual. That's why I look at it kind of just us as like these creatures kind of inhabiting this rock that basically, we found ways to communicate. We can send radio waves into space. If we actually forgot about like so much of this pre-existing hatred between us, it's like, dude, if we buckle down, we could be in like Star Trek level stuff in like a millennia. Like, that's cool.
Yeah. But the thing is, I think we're prevented from doing this because of the way our cultivated identities divide us, because the only way people can find meaning in life is by defining themselves as what they are opposed to.
It's kind of the quick and dirty way about it. It's just, all right, if somebody puts something out there and we dislike it, we go after that. Okay, that kind of seems like human nature. I dislike this, so I'm going to complain about that. I mean, people love to complain. That's fine. Yeah. But to actually say, okay, I disagree with this, here are the reasons why. And while I'm deconstructing this, at the same time, I'm going to say, here is something that we could actually use to build upon. And here are the reasons why I think it would work better. Now we're actually, rather than just demolishing everything in our path haphazardly at times, we're systematically dissecting the parts that don't necessarily work, and then kind of either retrofitting, we call it a remodel, call it a demo, and just rebuild something that we actually believe will work, because it's 2019. It's like we have to have that. We have the internet. You're telling me we don't have the technology to do some of this stuff? I mean,
yeah.
I don't know.
It's strange how technology is used to simultaneously connect people from all over the world and from all ages and all different perspectives. And yet at the same time, it's become kind of a way of facilitating an echo chamber, of finding your tiny little niche where everyone agrees with you and then blocking everyone else so that you can stay insulated in that little world of positive feedback.
Well, that's the thing. And I think you hit the nail right there on the head, Lapis, because I've noticed this in just so many different groups, just because as soon as it's like, whoa, wait, you want to stream with this person, or that person. And I noticed this even within, like, let's say the greater skeptic community, because I think it was somebody had been on with like Sargon, I believe V, and I think there was some backroom or off the record or conversations that people were sharing that were out there on the public internet. And it's like, even with I think harmful opinions of some other folks that would often go against the grain, at certain points they would be asked like, well, what does everyone else think? Because I mean, we're all curious about what everyone else thinks. I mean, whether we want them to agree with us or not. I mean, we're social creatures. We like to figure out everyone else's opinions. And in case if we happen to be outside whatever particular norms, maybe we could get some feedback. Maybe we're doing something that other people may not greatly appreciate. I mean, it's, I think a lot of it comes down to people don't like to admit that they're wrong at times. I think that might be an issue of pride. What do you think?
Well, I think that's one issue, people don't like to think that they may not have all the answers. But I think another part of it is, the cultivated identity. And another way of maintaining that identity is to establish your purity in your in-group. Well, I only associate with people of, this select breed of opinion. I am loyal to my in-group. Unlike you're treacherous. You constantly go off on these people who've had drama with me before. You're a fake friend. You're betraying me by having contact with this person.
Just kind of trying to score virtue points and to kind of earn clout within the group or community.
And like, it's a very strange sort of behavior, because you'd think that if you're going, especially if you are a person with a very small platform and you're discussing with someone with a very large platform, and your ideas don't necessarily have much mainstream acceptance, you'd think that going on a larger platform would be encouraged, but it's not actually encouraged. It's, kind of heavily discouraged, because what you're doing is that you're kind of selling out in a way by associating with people who have more power or more towards the mainstream. You are compromising your ideals by virtue of contact.
I mean, that in some ways, and again, it would depend on the particular situation in question, but I think that might kind of be the nature of things. And I think there was a wise district attorney that once said it best: you either die the hero or you end up living long enough to see yourself become the villain. So, I mean, it's because since nobody's perfect, and then we tend not really to forget about the past and the current meta in which we live right now, we just let things build up. So whatever sins you had in the past, even if other people had forgiven you at that point, well, we need to rehash like these ills and stuff like that. And it's just, when you start holding people accountable for things on an individual basis, in that maybe to hold someone accountable for the sins of their parents, there's something that just feels very wrong about that, just deep down, if somebody didn't actually have a choice in something. But the thing is, now with the world we live in, just over the past 15 years, I worked in the telecom industry for a decent enough time that I would say I learned a good number of things, just because I worked in direct sales. I would be the guy that would walk around and knock on your door, and basically, if we just pissed you off, we would try to earn you back. But I would often get questions I didn't know, so I'd ask one of the head of our tech operations. But essentially, to bring it back to the point, now if you have 15 years, 20 years of just however much stuff out there, now we all do stupid things every single day, and if that ends up happening, then it's kind of seems like we're trying to like hold like a knife to everybody's throats digitally, of course. So, and that's like not a cool way to operate.
Well, I agree and I somewhat disagree. I mean, on one hand, I think that the digital medium allows people to hold world leaders and politicians accountable in the way they've never been held accountable before. The politician could, for mostly, ignore, sometimes could almost completely ignore contact with their constituents, or at least only center their attention on a very specific group. But now they're exposed to attention from their constituents who they might have been ignoring previously. Their exposed attention to the country and the world. And I think that that's a beautiful thing and an important thing. The difficulty comes when we apply the sort of standards that you're applying towards, say, world leaders or a politician running for president, and you apply that to, I don't know, like your average person on the street. It's a very different sort of dynamic.
It's kind of like the theater of engagement, and I would agree with you there on that point, Lapis. The ability to hold individuals in positions of power to account, just that is a big thing. It now then we delve into the question of what is a public figure. By my understanding, if you create an online identity in some way, like that makes you a form of a public figure, which then basically I kind of start getting into the whole thoughts of, if you create an online identity, is that part of your identity? And I think that might at least legally almost come down to the fact where I remember, it's been a while, but I had applied for certain jobs in the past and they would ask any other aliases under which you were known. And basically, at most of the times, it's like, okay, I might have a few nicknames or something, but it never really was anything that stuck. I've been thinking about this more and more recently. And if somebody creates a particular brand or a character, some form of digital presence, I mean, is that an individual's intellectual property? And if it ends up being part of one's identity in some way, I mean, like, I don't know. It's like technology, the law always lags behind technology. So I'm curious about what your thoughts are on basically just kind of like what I was laying out. Is there any credence to it, or am I just a stark raving madman on the internet with a level up shirt?
Well, I think to some extent we're all, crazy here. But in a mad world, I think, and sometimes you have to be a little mad yourself. But anyway, when it comes to, does your online persona belong to you? I'd say to a certain extent it does. But another interesting question is, how does your online persona affect you? Some people have a very clear delineation between their online personas and their private lives. But I think sometimes, people use their online personas to enact fantasies, to enact not just sexual fantasies, but like sometimes political fantasies, sometimes emotional fantasies, to be the person that they could never be in their humdrum day-to-day life. And sometimes you see people, amassing huge amounts of clout for something that would never have happened had they not had this online persona. And then, when the online persona starts to become your job, I think the line between who you are as a person and the online persona starts to blur really badly. And I don't know, I think we've seen plenty of public figures on YouTube and on the internet who've become subsumed by their public persona, who become, almost slaves of what they think the demands of their audience are.
I'm not sure if you're familiar, but there is a particular meme that requires more dopamine as well as Sargon being referenced. So I was unsure if you were familiar with that one.
What is it?
Oh, Sargon need more dopamine. They have a little animated video where basically Sargon's his whole individualistic individualism. They basically turn him into like Cthulhu as like a monster. He's just like feeding on his own dopamine rush.
Yeah, the liberalistism.
Oh, I can appreciate one wanting to do something, but it's like, of all the things, okay, you're going to do something. And then I understand what you're saying, but just it really was just so cringe. And then you immediately jump to UKIP, and then Nigel Farage is like, all right, peace out, buckos. It's if it wasn't just seemingly so out of convenience, I'm like, man, that you're making the Grim Reaper meme and Sargon like a reality.
The hilarious thing about Sargon is that he completely destroyed UKIP.
I don't want to say objectively he completely destroyed it, but it really looks that way. I mean, I can just at that point, because had him and Paul Joseph Watson and Count Dankula. I understand, and the thing is, Count Dankula did it on a debt. If I get 10,000 likes, I'll run for UKIP. Puts together the little commercial. I'm like, all right, hey, whatever, you're gonna do it. And then Sargon goes in, and of course he does it. The whole pound his fist. I'm joining UKIP, and and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, you're doing this. You do realize people have been saying for like a good long while, like you've said very harsh things on the internet. It's like, well, are you going to be disavowing these things? You're going to be separating these things. It's like, all right, now apparently you're known as the rape tweet guy. So,
Yeah, it just he just doubled and tripled down. He treated it like a giant meme, like an excuse to promote his YouTube persona. And as a result, to that outside of that very isolated clique, which his persona appeals to, he attracted no one.
oh, geez. Well, it's the thing is, and I kind of noticed this a while ago. I'm like, all right, so what seems to get a lot of traction? All right, are you really going to, or at least a lot of folks, are you going to actually read? It's like tax reform and how, according to your particular situation, this shall affect you, or President Trump sleeps with adult actress or something like that, like basically something salacious, something scandalous, something going in like that. It's obviously you're going to do what's entertaining, because rule 14 of the internet, everybody loves a good dumpster fire. It's like this is just kind of part of humanity. If you can account for that, I think we can do better. Basically my thing is, I saw a lot of videos, and I actually kind of got into Sargon when basically he had been a bit more established and he was doing like different views, basically like your particular lens of whatever a situation is. I'm like, okay. I'm like, wow, a lot of people really don't seem to like him. Why would this be? And then at one point in the YouTube recommended, it popped up an older Sargon video where he was going after Anita. And I could just hear the venom in his voice. And he's like, I'm just like, oh, if your claim to fame is you're basically yelling at a female game developer for basically things that are, if you're constantly going after somebody, it's like that's going to have an effect. And I kind of notice a lot of these same folks that have been saying for a while, oh, you shouldn't care about what people say on the internet, making a really big deal about what other people are saying about them on the internet. And then I just kind of kept going, And then there was a point when I watched Sargon's debate with Dr. Winters. And I'm looking at this, and I kind of like, I'm going through it, and I'm like, okay, they list their sources there. Sargon has like 7 or 9 sources. About 7 of them are all Wikipedia. And I'm like, okay, he didn't go through to the other links or anything. And then Dr. Winters is there with like 32 to like 35 or 37 sources. I think 3 were Wikipedia, and then she actually sourced things. So I'm like, okay. And Sargon's just kind of like you were saying, almost like playing into a character, just trying to like be a dick. And like, I'm listening to Dr. Winters there, like actually having like a thorough discussion explaining, okay, you're wrong. Here's why.
Yeah. And that's like, even you can even see that, like, even with people you may not be inclined to agree with otherwise. When you come up against these people who have become so kind of subsumed by the personality they take on the internet, you find yourself siding with them regardless. And I think another person who's been kind of subsumed by his internet persona is Dave Rubin.
Dave has kind of bothered me, because I remember he actually had a thing in Manchester, New Hampshire, up here.
Yeah.
And basically what was going on is it was supposed to be, I think, him, Candace Owens, and the other gentleman from Turning Points USA. They ended up, Charlie Kirk, yeah. So they ended up piecing out to where was it? I think it was like an E! Entertainment. It was basically a bigger name interview, Harvey Levine or something like that. So, and he was there, and there were some protesters, and there happened to be a young woman that basically started asking him. She didn't actually ad hom attack or anything. And then at one point, he's offering her like money and stuff like that. She's like, "Oh, what's my time worth?" And just the thing when he gives an answer, it's like, "Well, if people don't like their current situation, just move. You have the freedom to move." I'm like, "All right, well, he might be able to do that. Well, I might have the ability to do that." It's like, if I'm in a situation where I'm just living paycheck to paycheck and I don't really know what the situation might be, to just like up and completely leave, especially if I have a family and like I got kids in school and everything, like these are a lot of considerations. To just up and move to say, "Oh, I'm just going to change my circumstance," it's like that seems like you're assuming a lot, or not necessarily accounting for like different people's situations. It seems like he's become dismissive in many ways to me.
Yeah, well, it's very easy to say, well, just move, lol, when you're like a millionaire from California. But if, as you said, like if you're a working person or God forbid, you're like unemployed or something, that is not an option for you. And I think that's like just one of the examples of how, your finances, how your social class can limit your mobility in the world. But
Oh, go on.
no, it's okay. I'm sorry. It seemed like I was done, and then you were just ready to. You had so much to say. I just.
Oh no, I had muted my mic. I wasn't sure if we were getting a little feedback. I was just hearing a little feedback on this end. I wasn't sure if it was translating through at all.
Oh no, not on my end.
Oh, okay. Now, let me see.
Anyway,
all right. No, but go on.
Sure. So, like, the main thing with Dave Rubin that I find so frustrating is that he claims to be opposed to identity politics, and yet whenever anyone critiques his takes or his analysis of a situation, he always reverts to, well, I'm a gay, liberal. I support gay marriage. Like, oh my goodness. Like you must have said this like 7, 8. That's like not even it. It's like hundreds, thousands of times you've said the exact same talking point. And then I remember another occasion where he was moderating this debate between Candace Owens and Blair White. Now, I'm like neither of those two women, but Dave Rubin somehow managed to come off as the biggest rube in the entire debate, because the whole time, instead of actually trying to facilitate a discussion when these two just turned the whole thing into an arguing match, instead he said, guys, 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 guys. Like, he just becomes like this caricature of the spineless centrist. Oh, did you log out of the thing? I guess I'm the only one here. Hopefully I didn't upset him too much with that spineless centrist comment. Sometimes, Lapis, you've got to know your audience with these sorts of things. But what I think he's trying to do is he's worried about the feedback, so he may log in again on the other side. And if not, well, I've had fun with this stream, so we'll just give him a few minutes as he starts to get things together. Just a second. So, how's everyone doing tonight? Well, let's read some of these comments. Rin McCallis says, yeah, the problem with Twitter is reducing ideas to a 2-second GIF. Yeah, I think, I suppose that is, it's true. It is what I was saying earlier, but it's true in some respects that the problem with Twitter is oversimplification of ideas. But I think another problem with Twitter is that people tend to build clout by quote tweeting or commenting on somebody else's content rather than providing any of their own. And I suppose you can see a similar effect on YouTube, because on YouTube, you make response videos, right? You make response videos to the big channels and cover all their embarrassing mistakes, and you have all these commentary channels proliferating and commenting on everything. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with making commentary on what more powerful people, more powerful influencers, God, I hate that word, are doing. But the problem comes down when you start when the response is how you are building all your power, when you are building all of your personality, because then you begin to have an investment in maintaining the critique. Oh,
I need to change the outlet we hook the internet up to, because it's actually hooked to a light switch too.
oh, I see. Sorry, I was a bit curious about what was going on there, so I just kind of held down the fort while you were away. But good to have you back. I'd worried that I offended you or something.
Oh, no, not at all. The internet just kind of went out, and I'm like, oh, this is very unfortunate. I was getting ready to rag on Dave Rubin and the fact that it's like, oh, I hate identity politics. Here, have some identity politics. I'm just calling it like I see it. That's all. But
yeah, it's so frustrating. And I have no problem with interviewing guests who have different political opinions, sometimes radically different than my own. You know, I've had libertarians, I've had ANCAPs, I've had centrists, I've had liberals, I've had what have you on my channel. And many of them have disagreed with me very strongly, and that's fine. But, you know, when I've invited these people on my channel, I have also made sure that I engage with their ideas. But more than that, you know, I push back when I see something I disagree with. When Dave Rubin hears people say things like, well, Obama was a communist, he says, well, that's very interesting, and then moves on. Like, he doesn't engage with people in that way.
One could say he's basically just kind of a passive interviewer, although there are certain points where he do it. It does seem that at least, and I don't know this for a fact, I don't have the data on this, but a lot of folks that tend to support him, he tends to err on what may be more just popular with a lot of his audience at times. I mean, if that's what somebody truly believes, I mean, fair enough, but it seems like it feels like there's some pandering going on there. To what extent, I have no idea. I don't know. Hey, he wrote a book. He can write his book. He can make money. I mean, hey, he's supporting himself. He's supporting his family. I mean, I find it hard to hate on somebody for making just an honest living. At the same time, I mean, a lot of his transformation from basically more of a progressive individual to more of a conservative individual, I mean, it seems fairly quick. It seems convenient. I don't know what's in another person's head nor heart, but I don't know. I mean, and this is something I think a lot of people pick up on, just because, and not to just rag on Dave Rubin for the sake of ragging on Dave Rubin, but I think there are a lot of folks that kind of do this. I think the best way around this is just kind of acknowledging it's like, all right, I'm doing something beneficial for myself. If we can at least acknowledge it, just because I'm also coming from, I did some real estate for a very short period of time. The big thing that they stress is having good faith, basically engaging in good faith, like agreement, not like going out of your way to try to screw somebody while you may be attempting to secure a better deal for yourself or your clients. At the same time, you're disclosing the appropriate things. You're not actively concealing something, because that could be held against you. Like, there are certain like actual standards within the industry. So I'm just kind of coming at it like from this way, because apparently we don't have any actual written or nonverbal rules for the most part with dialogue on the internet.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's not like everyone has like this little book of regulations. Okay, so if you violate this, you're off the internet, right?
Section 102, subsection C, according to the, and that's one of the reasons why I started up like a little website, and basically I was kind of going from the free speech angle, but now one of my kind of thought processes is taking it to how do we actually have these conversations? Because at this point, if we're upwards of 2 billion plus people on the internet, that's a lot of people from a lot of different walks of life that have all different cultures, that are all at different points within their communities, within their world, with what they may be working on, with their struggles at this point in their basically lives and everything. It's just like there's a whole bunch of different perspectives. How do we engage in particular ways? Because if you go back to, I think there was some document like rules of etiquette for the internet. There was something somebody put together, and I think like the mid to late 80s. And if you actually look at it, it's like these just seem like common rules of courtesy. And at some point, probably sometime between the emergence of Facebook and the end of Napster and LimeWire, I think all the rules at any level of courtesy got thrown out the window. So
Yeah. Well, it's hard to say. Like, did the internet go bad because people reverted, because more people joined and the lowest common denominator kind of dragged everyone down? Or did the internet go bad because people began to see and understand that because of the relative anonymity of many websites, they could get away with being a much bigger asshole than they could in their public life? And for a lot of people, life can be a very frustrating thing. And hey, it's a very easy thing to do, to take it out on some strangers online, who you have no real connection to and have no real empathy towards, because you don't even see their face sometimes. You don't even know what they sound like. You don't even know what they like or what they don't like. It's easy.
right. And that's one of the things that we see in trying to get over, because as human beings, we've adapted to communicating generally like face to face, like actually making like eye contact with our fellow creature and stuff. And basically we've developed over thousands of years to like understand these different intricacies, facial features. Of the past 100 years, we've basically developed to basically just function from an audio cue only angle as well. And basically over the past like 15, 20 years, have we really started to delve into just typing with our thumbs, text based messages, tweets, this, that, any form of other communication in just short, quick bites, how we're trying to communicate points here. And the sheer fact that we've gone from thousands of years of basically just developing and utilizing this to the past 15, 20, and having seemingly more and more of our actual interactions be that form, I mean, that's just a massive dynamic just change with a society and how we communicate. I'm also surprised we haven't completely destroyed ourselves yet.
Like well, I guess what you could call a paradigm shift. It's a completely new frontier, a new way of exploring communication. And I think you're right that it's no surprise that people aren't very good at it yet. However, then you come into the question of how do we move past it? How do we develop this? How do we rebuild these social connections? How do we rebuild courtesy? How do we rebuild connection? Because in many ways, the internet age has, while enabling us to connect to more and more different people, it's made those connections thinner than it would have been before, I'd say.
I think we need to highlight the things that we have in common rather than the things we have that are different, because I truly believe we're all more common than we are different. The more we actually have to share, it's very often that we focus on the differences because that's often what makes news. If all of a sudden, because unfortunately, whether we like it or not, the fact that things in general, at least in a lot of like Western world right now, things on average tend to go very right. Like if the news were to report, this local general hospital, they successfully delivered 108 babies tonight. It's like, okay, that actually seems to be something that happens on average, very high chance of like successful delivering of children and everything like that. Or 10,000 cars crossed this bridge successfully, no incidents. It's like that's not what we put on the news. We put when something tragic happens, when there's a failure in a system, in an actual structure or something, where oftentimes our fellow creature is actually hurt, injured, and sometimes they lose their lives. those are the things that actually make the news. So unfortunately, I think with a lot of the internet, and we were touching upon this a little bit earlier in regards to the internet, a lot of poor behavior was incentivized, especially that I did kind of notice on YouTube for a while, because if you can just kind of get on there, throw a bunch of people under the bus, and you're getting paid a bunch of money for that. I remember when the Amazing Atheist came on like a few years ago, and he's like, "Yeah, so I remember when I did my little political video on Sarah Palin, got like 1 million views. It's like a month later, YouTube mailed me a check for $4,000. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. I'm like, oh, And unfortunately, at the time, I mean, you could say it was just something within the system itself. Things were monetized, and basically, the more views you got, the more money you would get. And if you get the most views by saying the most salacious, slanderous, or basically hateful and hurtful stuff, just trying to destroy people, it's like you're kind of incentivizing poor behavior there.
Yeah. And not only that, you disincentivize any sort of end to that poor behavior. Because if you do, you alienate the audience that you've already built up. You alienate your source of income.
Right.
And I think with the news, like you were talking about earlier, because those stories about the worst things that have happened are the ones that tend to draw the most clicks, because people, there's a certain urgency to these sorts of things when something goes wrong that draws people as attention. And that's why you see the massive phenomenon of clickbait headlines, is because people can't be drawn in such large numbers by a nuanced discussion. There has to be, well, here's an outrageous statement. But if you actually look through the article, it is a more nuanced discussion of the topic at hand. It is a more intellectually engaging activity. But the problem is, the websites know that most people are just going to click on the article, read the headline, maybe the first paragraph, and quickly scroll down through the rest, maybe leave a comment, and then move on with their day. So how do you make money in a situation like that? Well, you have the most outrageous headline possible with the weirdest picture possible, and that you'll get the most clicks.
Bingo. I mean, that's just what's incentivized. And the terrible thing, Lapis, is what you just laid out. That's if you're lucky. The crazy thing is, I went to symposium probably about 2 years ago now with my dad and my brother down at the Harvard Club down in Cambridge. And one of the first guest speakers was a gentleman who worked for the New York Times. And one of the things he was laying out was his discussion about AI and its ability to almost like work some ways within the criminal justice system or be able to portray certain things in the most objective manner possible. But he highlighted something basically, and I still need to get this chart from him or find it on online, but basically he showed Twitter interactions and left and right. And basically, if you look at this, basically the only real interaction was a lot of times at the extremes. And the other thing that he highlighted, it was a breakdown of how folks that basically would interact with different material, let's just say a standard news article, you'd have the number of folks that basically just looked at the headline. All right, everybody looks at the headline. Then the amount of folks that actually clicked on it. And then it jumps down a fair bit. And then the actual people that read like the first paragraph, and it jumps down even more. And then the number of people that actually read through the entire article, it drops dramatically from that. And I mean, I realize I'm guilty of this. I've shared certain things without actually even clicking on it, because I'm like, oh, well, that seems like it's something that's good and positive, and it's something that I would like people to take a look at. So I would just kind of put it out there. And then I'm like, we're all more similar than we are different. And I do this. Well, I guess it's not like anyone else would do that.
Well, no, I'm definitely very guilty of the same thing. Like, I saw this headline, and unfortunately, like on Twitter and in some ways on YouTube, and because I'm like a relatively small account on YouTube, most of the way I interact with the world is by, or get material for my account is by commenting on things or by quote tweeting things. And so in this case, It was kind of a really stupid headline from a newspaper article on HBO's adaptation of Watchmen, and it said, and the article's headline was, there will be no moralizing description or focus on real world issues in this adaptation of Watchmen. And I thought, well, that's stupid, because the whole point of Watchmen was to engage with these real world issues. But then someone in the comments in my reply said, well, I actually read the article and it doesn't actually seem to be that bad. It was much more nuanced than the headline. And I actually read the article too. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with this. All he's saying is, I still want to tackle these real world issues, but I want there to be more nuance. And I think we're living in an age without nuance. I thought, hey, that's not bad at all. But by then, my tweet had already amassed like 100 likes and dozens of retweets. And so everyone had already gotten the same false idea I had without ever actually reading the article themselves. And I am part of this system. I am a gear within this system. And the worst part is, the more I act like this, the more followers I accumulate. It is incentivizing me to act this way. And I still haven't taken down the tweet because, there's a part of me that's like, well, so many people have already seen it. Maybe some of them will read the article and they'll discover that I was wrong originally. But that's just disingenuous. The truth is, I should take down the tweet because I was wrong and making a statement saying I was wrong. But I haven't done that yet. Why? Because I am a part of this problem.
Rather than having to take it down, if you gained new information, would it not be the optimal scenario, at least? And again, I'm not familiar with exactly what was there, but maybe just update folks on what you think.
Okay, sure. I guess that makes sense.
And that's one of the things. And this is something that kind of Tim Pool put out there on the concept of fake news. Now, you might not be a big fan, or I might disagree with him on certain examples he highlights, or think he's stressing particular issues a bit more than are necessary. But the fact remains, if you put something that's out there and somebody just kind of comes across that, then this is basically just their neurons are firing in a particular way. I mean, our minds are literally just being constantly molded and stuff, and we see that. And then we're like, oh, okay, we kind of tweak our minds a little bit saying, okay, well, if this is an actual fact and that ends up being inaccurate data, I mean, to explain kind of like what you did there, unless you can boil it down very quick and easy, which very oftentimes, like, these are a bit more complicated and nuanced there, people are already kind of like drifting in one way. And the sheer fact that it has been incentivized, and I do think a lot of these articles and different companies have actually adapted to this. I think they are actually spitting out almost, I think they're almost leaning into it in a way, realizing that people will respond on YouTube or Twitter. And the sheer fact that they're getting any type of outrage or pushback is actually getting more and more people to click on the articles. Because if what you want to do is maximize your clickage, because we live in the clickonomy, some folks are adapting to that. I truly think that's a case. It's just kind of like the market adapting to the culture within the market itself.
Yeah. I definitely see like the outrage culture. It is definitely being monetized by these companies. They definitely do try to pick the worst headlines possible because that's what gets them the clicks. That's what gets them the attention. And that's what makes them money. And that's the money they need to keep making more articles, keep paying their journalists.
Well, I think Professor Jordan Peterson may have said it best. He said, I've learned how to monetize social justice. And it's like, oh, okay, I mean, you can't fault the guy for being honest about what he's doing, but it's the thing that bothered me is at one point he kept on citing like his first book. So I'm like, okay, let me go back and read, or at least listen to on Audible, like his first book. And then when I get halfway through it, he utilizes a quote from somebody else. And it really got the old noggin a jogging, because what it said is the prerequisite for political stability is social justice. For it is the nature of things that injustice will not endure. And I listened to that, and I'm like, I agree with that statement. Why have I not heard Professor Peterson use that statement at any point within the past several years when he's been a public figure?
Well,
And I just, it doesn't seem to be a popular thing. He has said that has been a member of the Socialist Party, but it's just like, if he truly wanted to bridge the gaps, I feel like that's something you're at least kind of starting to speak the same language at that point, and just kind of like come at it from that angle. Maybe he hasn't analyzed it from that angle, but I'm kind of trying to, or at least I'm looking at it from that angle. I'm like, that actually makes sense to me. I'm like, okay, this is a way to conceptualize things that I think a lot of folks can at least have as a common reference point and just try to explain things. So I don't know. Hang out with a lot of more harshly conservative folks often, I feel like I'm constantly dodging Moabs or something, but it's okay. Steel sharpens steel.
Well, I won't deny that I also don't really spend time around like really conservative figures. They've kind of like filtered out of my social circles. But I do spend a lot of time with people who are very far to the left. I mean, I myself am pretty far left already. And I spend time with people who are even further left than me. And what does it say about me when I have, social circles that are overwhelmingly of people whose I basically agree with on most things, and very few of people who will challenge my perspectives. Maybe there's a problem there.
Well, it's trying to broaden your groups and everything. It's just the level of toxicity we're seeing on the internet right now. I mean, there's always been toxicity, but the sheer fact you're adding just millions upon millions of new users on a really regular basis, coming from all different backgrounds, different communities, depending on which communities they're coming in through. I mean, that's going to be a bunch of varied experiences, and the sheer fact we've incentivized a lot of poor behavior, because now it's like people have literally people eating Tide Pods and like licking ice cream in supermarket shelves in order to like outrage people, and so maybe they can get a few million views and become famous. It's like, oh, okay, I realize these things will happen, but it's like, if you really have to do something like that, it's like, I thought back in the day we referred to that as like being a dumbass. I don't know. Apologies for my language.
But well, see, the thing is, it doesn't really matter what people think of your stuff as long as it gets people to think about your stuff. That's the problem with this new internet age.
Well, I do think that's why we probably also ended up with a President Trump, because just the sheer fact that all the oxygen was sucked out of the room. And it almost reminds me of that episode of The Simpsons. I'm not familiar if you had watched The Simpsons that much, but there's an episode where Mr. Burns, basically the nuclear engineer owning plant owner there, basically just stereotypical, the whole capitalist, Montgomery Burns, the dude on like the Monopoly box and everything. And the doctor's like, well, Mr. Burns, you see, you have so many different diseases. They're trying to go through this doorway, and they're all trying to get through at once. Thereby, you're not actually showing any symptoms. He's like, so I'm invincible. And he's like, no, sir, just the very slightest thing. I mean, you could just be invincible. Excellent. And it's like, I feel like that's kind of like what's going on in a way. It's just like there's so much terrible negative stuff out there that it's like nobody could spend enough time focusing on any one thing, where it's like nothing ends up sticking. Like he just ends up throwing more and more stuff out there, and unfortunately a lot of the media is just kind of jump on for its sake, to kind of get the more clicks on that article. It's like, okay, you're telling me about this politician's tweets on the internet. I typically have the ability to find out what people are saying on the internet myself. I still remember when the media would report live on the ground in different countries and actually talk to people and see what's going on in the world, because it's like, if over half the stuff is just about what people are saying on the internet, who's covering the stuff that's actually happening in the world?
Yeah. Well, honestly, I think that's actually the main strategy of the Trump administration. And you know what? I think the media is complicit. Like, I think there was this secret, I remember there's this secret recording with the, I think it was the main editor of CNN or something. Maybe it was the executive. I can't remember exactly what the position of great influence within CNN. And he was basically admitting, when talking with this other guy, well, yeah, Trump's been a godsend for us. The mainstream media had been losing huge amounts of money, losing huge amounts of attention prior to that. But thanks to Donald Trump's antics, all of a sudden they have millions of people who are willing to tune into them. So they will see all of the things that are because they're covering Donald Trump, right? And as a result, Donald Trump got, tons and tons of free press coverage because they were all so offended at every single thing he was doing, because it was profitable for them to be offended, because it was profitable for them to cover him. And because he was covered so much, he was able to connect with that, say, 20-25% of the population that strongly agrees with his views. And that 25% of the population, because of all that constant coverage, was so energized and so mobilized that they carried him to the presidency.
The terrifying thing is, Lapis, the way you just described it, in a way, and I'll finish out my thought in just a second, is President Trump is using capitalism to destroy CNN and like a lot of the other mainstream media. And I believe the way he's doing that is because I had touched upon this with Owen a little bit before, is the fact that if you are a publicly traded company, basically the corporate officers, as well as I believe the board of directors, they have a fiduciary duty to maximize their return to their shareholders.
Mm-hmm.
So if CNN is part of Greater Time Warner, and as a company, they must actually maximize their return. If their maximum return is just covering basically just what the president, just a random like shit posting he's putting out there, like when he's on the can or something, it's like, okay, you're getting a number of clicks, you're getting a lot of people to watch. But if you're actually a news program, you're a news agency, it's, if you put stuff out there, especially the sheer fact that I'm pretty sure a lot of stuff that's being put out there, it is often incorrect. And I believe a lot of the time that's deliberate, because as we know, from one of the president's aide, John Miller, aka one of his pseudonyms that he called into radio stations under. I'm pretty sure John Miller is constantly leaking at the White House, spewing a whole bunch of BS to throw people off, so that when it comes out that either the administration denies it, and even if the president literally is lying and saying this, the sheer fact that if there was somebody actually reporting that, he can cite, well, they can't actually confirm anything because of executive privilege. It's like, when you're a journalist, when you're a reporter, when you're a news agency, you report something, you're kind of like, especially if you can't list your sources because you're protecting them, basically you're borrowing from the public's trust, and you build up trust over time. It's just, if you end up throwing something out there with maybe not having the extra 2 or 3 sources to basically confirm and everything there, just to kind of put it out because you're almost coming at it from almost an emotional standpoint, the fact that if you're wrong, that takes away from the trust greatly. If that happens too much, which I do believe the president is just throwing so much out there, that the media is kind of just jumping the gun at certain points, that he's using that clickbait thing, that once things completely translate over digitally, there's going to be just so much other competition, and if he takes away from their credibility, folks will just end up fracturing.
Mm-hmm. Or they'll be like, the whole point of the Trump administration isn't to get people to actually believe everything Trump is saying or to buy every one of his, millions of lies. It's to make people doubt the concept of truth itself. It's to make people become so overloaded with information that they want to tune out of the discussion. And that's when you are at the most risk of being taken advantage of, because you have so many people looking at the look at me, the show, the presentation, the rude comments, the terrible tweets, right? You have all that showbiz, and then you have the actual damage that Trump is doing to the country, doing to the world behind that screen. And because so much attention is being drawn by the fireworks, no one can pay attention to the actual rot within the administration.
That's the thing that terrifies me, is the sheer fact that if the media is going to cry Trump and they're going to bring up so many different little things, it just kind of bothers me that if and when the president does something that's actually wholesale illegal, that's actually completely horrific, if people's trust in the media is deteriorated that much, he can just say fake news, brush it off, and that might just lose traction just because they've tried to call him on so many other things that just there wasn't substance to, and that's dangerous.
Hmm. Yeah. Or even that, yeah, I know it's a tricky situation. And the problem is that it's very hard to think of, well, what can we do about these massive media conglomerates deliberately, sacrificing, you know, their long-term survivability and the credibility of journalism for profit. What can ordinary people do about that? I suppose you could say, well, tune out, find your news from other sources. But then there's the other problem where, just because you're not a mainstream media outlet, it doesn't mean you can't be biased in some other way. Like a lot of these organizations, like Mint Press on the left, or Breitbart, or InfoWars on the right, they're even less credible than CNN or Fox News. Like they're still bad. And that's the problem when you've undermined trust in the media so much, is that people begin to just believe what they want to believe.
Well, we've facilitated for that, Lapis, in that now we have so many different places where folks can consume different media, whether it's on YouTube, or basically any other type of service that may be out there. You can now literally pick and choose any opinion you want. You just got to be able to search for it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the big things that I see here going on with this iteration is that what I would say is there might actually be opportunities within this. And the thing that bothers me more than really anything else right now is the sheer fact that CNN had the answer to this about 5 or 6 years ago. They had the answer because they were promoting like the CNN citizen journalists. I still remember when they were promoting it. It's like, oh, there's a storm event, send us your footage and stuff. Like, you're going to be a member of the journalist community. And then they just kind of turned off that program and they ended it. So I think we're going to see more of the rise of like citizen journalism as well. And I do think there are ways to kind of promote things that might actually help. I've been working with a number of other individuals on a particular project that may help facilitate this and may help facilitate folks whom actually would be interested in getting out in the community and actually speaking to folks maybe on the ground within their community, within basically their scope of folks that they know, and actually have a way to maybe earn a little bit of additional income and revenue for themselves. Because I think the solution to a lot of this, and it's kind of like when I will talk with like a lot of like different like Marxists or folks that are like really truly believe like full on communism and stuff like that. It's like, listen, like I get where you're trying to go, and like as far as like the ethos, the pathos, and everything, like believing, like just wanting to help people and everything, it's like I'm right there with you. It's just sometimes the ideas by how we get there, that particular logos, that's the thing where I'm like, I'm not sure. And I'll just give a quick example. As far as universal healthcare goes, I live in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We have Romney Care. But the thing is, in order to achieve Romney Care, we had to make a lot of very difficult, hard spending cuts. But that allowed us to post a $1 billion surplus that allowed us to pay for it. It's something that I've utilized in my life. When it first rolled out, it was a bit slow, it was a bit clunky, but as time went on, it ended up being something that was very valuable here that a number of people utilize when it is necessary. So that is something that we did. It's just I don't hear folks using that same model. And that was the big thing that kind of bothered me about when President Obama, in one of the debates with Mitt Romney, said, oh, Mitt, Obamacare is just 95% Romney care, because in my mind, I'm saying to myself, that's kind of like saying I wrote a really good essay about World War II in high school, and I'm just going to copy and paste that essay for my doctoral thesis in college. It's just, okay, there are a number of other factors here, because what may work for Massachusetts, we have approximately 6 million folks here, relative to the rest of the country, fairly small geographic area. We also have a number of universities that do actually specialize in nursing, medicine. We do have a lot of different hospitals as well within our geographic area. So what worked for us here is not necessarily going to work for Florida, for maybe like Alabama or like North Dakota or something like that, where there are other factors. And that was a real. I understand why President Obama, a lot of the Democrats, they saw this as a once in a lifetime thing to push forward on healthcare. I get it, but it did kind of bother me with how fast it was rammed through, because I still remember there was a 2 week period there, Lapis, where folks are talking about like co-ops and like there were ideas actually being around. And as soon as, oh, and as soon as I think it was Barbara Boxer from up in Maine, I think she on the committee, it just went right through. And I'm like, oh, we were having good discussion. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, maybe if like America had been able to take a bit more time. I mean, obviously Obama still had like a 2 year time frame. Otherwise, oh wait, there goes your congressional and Senate majority, and there's no way in hell the Republicans are ever going to touch healthcare. In fact, they might actually cut back on it if you let them. He had a 2 year window to get something passed. But, I don't necessarily like, maybe if America had spent a bit more time discussing, they could have gotten a proper universal healthcare system that covered everyone, because there's still about 20 million people in America who are, too wealthy to cover for Obamacare, but too poor to actually be able to afford health insurance. And that, to me, that's a very big problem, because that's a lot of the community who basically have to get by with nothing. And even the people who do have health insurance, they have to pay huge sums of money that can cripple a family and cause them to lose their home. And there was already enough homes being lost around 2008.
One of the things, and this is just based upon a lot of my more recent experiences, it's like I'm trying to go through and get particular prescription and stuff, and I'm like, all right, going through all my doctor stuff, and I'm going like a couple week period, and I'm like, oh, well, I mean, like it's not a life or death situation or anything with this, but it's like if this was this would probably be a real major problem for like a lot of folks, and eventually it ends up being like a data coding system or something that was swapped over to. But like this did kind of take a while, and just in the back of my mind, I'm like, if there was just a much more simplified system, and this is, I think, why one of the reasons why, and I'm not sure if a lot of the folks on Fox News were ready for this, is when they had Senator Sanders on, and they actually asked the crowd how many folks would be open to maybe something like Senator Sanders was describing, and you had the majority of people cheering for it.
Yeah, and this is on Fox News, like ultra conservative platform, so quite surprising.
It's so many more folks, and this is one of the benefits that I do believe Senator Sanders has kind of put out there, at least from kind of more of a leftish perspective, is basically, and Andrew Nace trying to do this for UBI as well. He's kind of gotten the idea out there. And the thing is that gets me is there are actually more conservative arguments for universal health care. And the thing that bothers me is I never hear any of these arguments. The sheer fact that if you could decouple one of the most expensive cost drivers for business, which is healthcare, from employment, the sheer fact that if you do that, a lot of folks literally they'll stay at their jobs just because, like, maybe their kids need a particular drug that they happen to have by that very particular plan. The fact that you can decouple that guess what? As Dave Rubin said, you're opening up a lot of mobility for different people there as well. You make that a lot easier there rather than having to wait about 90 days or so before necessarily getting coverage at your next job. You could try to pay Cobra, but Cobra ends up being incredibly expensive as well anyway. If you do that, plus you're taking away about 30% of the cost to so many businesses. If you remove 30% of the cost, like you're talking, the company can post higher profits. Good for the company. Guess what? That's probably an incentive to pay workers more. Guess what? You could hire more workers. Guess what? You could probably command higher salaries for some of those workers as well. Maybe you could actually do like a bonus. Oh my God, if we actually manage this right, Lapis, we might actually have a pension system. So it's like, and the thing that gets me, at least from a U.S. perspective, I believe you're in Canada, correct?
Yes.
Okay. The thing that gets it for me, it's like, all right, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. At least 2, if not 3 of those sound like an argument for some form of universal coverage of healthcare. I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
No, I mean, like, life. Well, if you're have absolutely no access to healthcare, how much of a life can you actually have? I mean, at the first stroke of disease, you're pretty much screwed.
Hmm. Hmm.
Pursuit of happiness. How are you able to pursue happiness when you have cancer and you can't treat it? I mean, that seems like it would crush any hope of pursuit of happiness.
You break your leg if you don't have the ability to maybe, I don't know, get that set. I mean, there's diseases, the sheer fact that you may not be able to work and contribute, and that's also led to the fact we spliced up healthcare so much that it's like, how much does it cost to set a broken leg? I don't know.
Yeah, like the insulin prices in America are insane. It costs like $6 to produce a bottle of insulin, and then it costs like $350 at the drugstore. Just absurd.
And then you also get into the sheer fact of liberty. It's like, if you are truly debilitated, or I mean, even if you have something, depending on what you're dealing with in your life, I mean, if you got something that's so chronic that you don't have the ability or the funds or the resources to help take care of, I mean, like, you may just have an existence, but like, are you truly really living? Are you truly free? Or are you basically just, you get up, you follow the same schedule 5 or 6 days a week, rinse, lather, repeat? I mean, is there any real like enjoyment or substance at that point?
Yeah, if you're just kind of like always chained to a dead end job with, your whole life dictated to you by someone else. And yeah, it can be quite a bleak existence out there. And but it's the things some people have to do to get by nowadays.
I think a lot of it is the fact that, again, like, people are hesitant of change. I mean, my eternal citation for this will be the sheer fact that anytime Facebook comes up with any type of update, everybody loses their collective marbles, it seems. At least that was how it was for me back in the day. And then I stopped using Facebook for a number of years, and I went back. I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. How does this work? Like 217 updates later. But the sheer fact that, I mean, that always happens within communities. Um, but I truly think there is a better way, because with the power of the internet, with the sheer reduction, the sheer fact that we can do this more or less just for the price of electricity and just our collective time right here, the sheer fact that we can do this, I do think we have the technology and the resources available to try to figure this out. And we kind of touched a little bit earlier about how a lot of times we're incentivized just attacking things, trying to destroy, because then we can get the credit for the kill. It's literally like playing like World of Warcraft or something. Oh, we down the Sargon raise box. Yay! Oh, look at all this fat liberalist loot here. Hunt, da-da, 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 all that jazz. It's like, okay, that's great. Now what?
World Tears is loot.
Don't touch the legendary Satchel of V. We might have to turn this adult. That's just all in good fun. But no, my point is, I think at this point, rather than simply destroying, we can do more creating. I realize the irony of this coming out of the mouth of somebody entitled "The Means of Destruction," but hear me out, Lapis. My idea is, at least at this point, with things such as the blockchain and the ability to kind of like almost assign and show that people have done things, the ability that if we are essentially tracking pretty much everything on the internet, okay, if somebody comes up with a better idea, we can actually give credit where credit's due. Because I feel like a lot of folks don't engage because they fear, if I put my $1 million idea out there, somebody will steal it, and then they'll do the whole like Edison versus Tesla thing, and it's like, I got to the patent office first, so I get all the credit, and history will remember me for about 80 some odd years before we even look back and remember who you were. I feel like that's a thing, but if most everything on the internet is time-stamped, geolocated for more or less, I'm like, why can't we have folks working on like great collective projects and stuff, trying to like actually figure out, I don't know, like the human genome, or like what? All I know is that the internet can find this flag that people just keep on hiding, and they're able to use the telemetry from the clouds, the sun, aircraft, and go around honking a horn. If the internet can find something like that, you're saying we can't figure out a lot of our problems? I find that hard to believe.
Well, in many ways, we already have made a lot of progress. Like, look at something like Wikipedia. Like this is, sure, it's not always the best source if you're going to be sourcing things, but it is good for like basic intro to a subject, right? Um, well, Wikipedia is, it's volunteer run, right? It's basically just a bunch of people assembling the little bits of information they know and posting it on the internet.
Right. And that's one of the things. And I still remember when Wikipedia was just kind of coming around. Like one of my professors, I remember Professor Moser back in college. He was always kind of like the cool, hip, eccentric professor that was always just kind of like throw out there. He's like, "So what if you smoke some weed?" And just kind of give a funny look. But he also did a lot of like surveys for like different forms of employment stuff. That's how he made a lot of his money. He would ask like all these series of questions and basically show certain personality types and basically the likelihood of them working with particular teams. And especially if it was a larger, very important position, you're going to want to consider it from a number of different angles as well. And I remember one of the heads of the College of Management, the dean there, he would always be asking me, he's like, "So what goes on inside that class?" I'm like, "Oh, he teaches us useful things." He's like, "Okay." And I'm like, "Is he really that eccentric that they're just kind of looking for like dirt on this poor dude?" I'm like, "All right, I'll consider myself a Moser minion." And he taught us how to communicate something that may be more complex and trying to break it down in almost like a memo format, like 3 to 5 bullet points, just simplify it rather than trying to like if you lay out so much that a person's head starts to hurt, they really stop being receptive. That's what I found.
If you just kind of bludgeon them over the head with facts or rhetoric, it can get very exhausting. But I think like the best ways of communicating is really where you try to take some of the other person's word and some of the other person's thoughts and then combine them with your own, right?
Right. Well, no, that's straight up like the Hegelian dialect. And I think this is something that Mr. Zizek had pointed out because he's like, "I'm not actually a communist. I'm a Hegelian." It's that whole is basically you're taking different sides of an argument. You take what works for one, you take what works for the other, see if they actually line up. Sometimes you need to do further modification. But if you can actually come out with something that works that's greater than the sum of its parts, I mean, we never know where a good idea may come from.
Thesis, counter thesis, synthesis.
That's it. Yeah, those are the words I couldn't remember.
Yeah. What do you think of Zizek or Zizek or however you pronounce that complicated Slavic name?
Well, that's the thing. And I forget whether he's a doctor, he's a professor, or he just happens to be some intellectual out there. Because I remember after him and Professor Peterson had their debate, I started looking into him and I listened to like his Channel 4 interview with like Kathy Newman there. And I went through like some other material. And it's like he does seem to be very honest. I'm not sure his exact particular life situation, but the sheer fact he's like, "Yes, I am offensive." But he's like, "Here is why I am offensive." And he did make some offensive comparisons, but he was honest and he explained why he was doing that. He is very interesting, and he's, as far as I've seen, he was pretty much the only person to really get. I think it may have been Matt Delhante or somebody else kind of got Professor Peterson on the ropes a little bit, but really got him to the point where he's like, "I hear you talk about all these post-modern neo-Marxists, and I just have to ask you, where are these people? Because in the world, there are about 7 of them, and I know 3. So where are these people?" And at that point, because he actually took exactly what he said, broke it down. He's like, "These are the people I know that identify as this. What are you talking about?" So it was one of those things, and it's like he actually thought about it. And that's the thing. It's like this is actually one of the rules. And I think Professor Peterson's book, and he says, he's like, assume that the person we're speaking with has something that they can teach us. And that is how we learn. If you don't talk and get another perspective, I mean, like, we're just going to be doing the same thing. And if there's a more optimal way to do it, why the heck not?
Mm-hmm. And another thing that I think you have to have when you're doing a discussion is that there needs to be a basis of mutual respect. You don't necessarily have to love the other person or know them super well, but there does need to be this basis of respect that you say, okay, my opponent or the person who I'm talking to, There's another human being. They have their own perspective. I have my perspective. I'm not going to compromise my perspective to appease them, but I'm going to hear their perspective out. I'm going to, entertain the possibility of their perspective being true. I am open to the possibility of being wrong.
Being able to entertain an idea while not necessarily believing it. I mean, that's a novel concept. I think isn't that the definition of what an enlightened mind is supposed to be, or something like that?
Socrates said something to that effect.
Oh, okay. Because it sounded very familiar. So that's one of the things that it's just, once we factor in the internet, and this is just, I feel like we're going through a digital adolescence right now, and that we're in a very awkward stage in that, yes, we had the early formative years of the internet. Yes, there were a lot of crazy things that were going on at the time. The sheer fact that some of those things maybe aren't necessarily completely heavily being promoted out there is not necessarily a bad thing. I do support freedom of speech. I tend to think that most information, for the most part, should be available for free. As far as specific training, maybe that's something else, but I think that comes down to some more socially building countries and nations. But as far as the internet goes, I do agree, kind of like with what you were saying a bit earlier in the conversation we've been having, Lapis, is that we don't necessarily know that reference point. And that's why I did want to do this conversation with you, to see if we kind of can't try to hash out and find some common points of common ground where maybe we can agree, or just some way to conceptualize how we could go about these different conversations. Because from my perspective, I think a lot of the things, when somebody's putting something like grossly offensive or something out there, I tend to believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and I'll give somebody the ability to say things that at times might be hateful if I'm going to support freedom of speech. But at the same time, I have the ability to use my freedom of speech to combat that. And just the ultimate form of this, which really kind of led me to this thought point, was when we had the Westboro Baptist Church, and when they were protesting the funerals of folks that were dying in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they would have signs and say very hateful things at those funerals. That was the point where I'm just like, okay, why can't we just get rid of these folks and everything that's so disrespectful? But then what I saw was other folks come out after that kept happening, and they formed a human chain, and they used their form of freedom of speech and freedom of expression to stand out and prevent them from interacting. And then most of those protests seemed to go away.
Well, in a way, the solidarity of the community was stronger than the hate. And if, these Westboro Baptist Church people had instead been locked up or something, they could have become martyrs for that whole silly section of America that thinks like America is like the modern Sodom and Gomorrah or something.
Oh, God. Yes. All these different states that either end up going liberal or conservative. Oh, the hurricane's hitting you because you're sinners. Oh, the hurricane's hitting you because of sinners.
Climate change. I hate that so much. Like, Mother Earth is getting revenge on the conservatives of Florida. I'm like,
Mother Earth freaking responds. And the thing that gets me is, one of the things that basically kind of may say woke me up on the whole climate change thing. It's like, okay, no, things happen. The climate does change. Okay, I believe that. And then I'm arguing with one of my more conservative friends, and it's like, oh, well, memes. I mean, if the ice cap's melted, that's only 3 or 4 feet in addition to the oceans. I'm like, 3 or 4 feet. I'm like, at this current point, I did study like natural disasters. I did have a really good teacher back in school that we went over all this. I'm like, all right, so if you were taking normally a 15-foot storm surge from a hurricane, and I put 3 or 4 feet even on top of that, not even trying to account for the fact that the entire ocean is an extra 3 and 4 feet. So I'm not even sure of the calculation on that, but you're talking about, okay, probably an extra 30 to 40, 50% or so on a storm surge side, all that much more energy as well. And the sheer fact that you're putting a whole bunch of liquid, a whole bunch of water, which is an active ingredient. Basically, it's a compound that reacts, and we're adding it to the ecosystem that is Earth. And he's like, well, no. What you would see if this was the case, what you would see is there would be certain parts that would be more of the Earth that are more arid, and they'd start to green. So he tells me this. I'm like, okay, no, I'll take this into consideration. 3 weeks later, I look on Facebook. All of a sudden, I see a time-lapse photo, past 15 years, of certain parts of India and China. I'm like, oh, it's going from brown. Oh, look, there's some greening. Someone's like, go us. And I'm like, oh, God. Exactly what he said we should be looking for is happening. Oh, how dare these folks that may have been maybe at the time overselling it a bit. Okay, they were off 30 or 40 years in some of their predictions. Yeah, Earth like 2 billion years old, man, according to some scientists. So little bit of error there. We only have so much data.
Mm-hmm. Well, another part of the climate change thing is I live in a country that would, it kind of sounds weird, but in some aspects, we would benefit from climate change because if the permafrost melted, huge swaths of Canada that you could never actually plant crops on would suddenly become open for cultivation. However, in Africa and Mexico and all these countries around the equator, well, Africa is not a country, it's a continent, but aside from that, we'd see massive desertification because of the weakening of the ozone layer. And no, that's terrible. And that would lead to less cultivable land. And what you'd see is a massive, and we're already starting to see, a massive refugee from all these climate crises. It would create a refugee wave.
See, my big thing is, and I feel like some of our comrades, let's say on the left, I think one of the things that ends up kind of taking some of the wind out of the proverbial sails is the fact that, especially if you're looking at like all like the 3 standard models and everything, the sheer fact that if you're looking at like I believe it's the R3 model or whatnot, like basically the more catastrophic model of basically where things just start going up completely exponentially, the fact that to make an absolute definitive claim saying this is the exact model, we are on it this amount of time based upon the data we have, it isn't quite accurate. And the sheer fact that some folks, out of probably a sense of urgency in the past, it kind of gives the folks on the right the ability to say that, oh, all these leftists, like scientists, they have their thumb on the scale, even if they're stressing things maybe that they don't quite have the data for, out of a sense of urgency, they're trying to do it. That kind of takes away, they can cite disingenuousness rather than if somebody kind of comes on and is like, listen, none of us are the almighty. None of us truly know. Based on the data, these are the models we have. Do we know exactly what's going to happen? No. Here's the thing. There is a chance this could happen. And if this is something that could happen, and we have the ability to prevent or minimize this from happening, this is something that's very important to us. Maybe it wouldn't work, but I feel like that would bring some folks to the table. Unfortunately, we've almost created a cottage industry about yelling about climate change, and that's unfortunate.
Well, here's the thing about climate change. I think a solid majority of people believe in climate change and believe in taking urgent steps to reduce and eliminate carbon emissions. At some point, you have to wonder, is it really worth convincing that third of the population? I mean, sure, I want to convince them to take the climate crisis seriously. But on the other hand, if, the sacrifice I have to make to actually convince them that it's a problem is to delay the action that needs to happen right now in order to avert, bad things from happening in regards to climate change, I think, on the hand, I'll just say, okay, let's just go ahead, put on these regulations. They can deny it all they like. In 30 years, they'll look back on it and say, well, I believe that climate change exists now, and they'll find some new way, because it's easy to be progressive for social struggles that happened in the past.
Well, of course. I mean, nobody really wants to be on the wrong side of history. I think the sheer fact that we've gotten to the point, this probably due to a fact of a number of other occurrences and things going on around the world, is when I start seeing a guy like Mark Dice basically selling "I love global warming" T-shirts. I'm like, all right, I get what you're doing. You're trying to poke fun at trying to like anger and just kind of like elicit emotion in different liberal folks. It's like you're now monetizing it, and it's just the fact that if you can kind of just point to them to like more or less irrefutable things that even they'll acknowledge and everything. It's like, okay, at this point we are seeing record high temperatures around the world. Oh, my apologies. Certain models were a couple of decades behind in the scope of millions and billions of years. Our bad, man. Sorry, Mike. And like I feel like there are better arguments that we could have, kind of poking fun at folks rather than just trying to go on the back of, oh, well, you're a fascist, obviously, because I don't think that's as constructive. Whereas I kind of grew up in the whole like the 90s and like the Captain Planet generation. It's like, give a hoot, don't pollute. Can't we just kind of all agree that poisoning Mother Earth is a bad thing? Like, I don't remember that being controversial.
Yeah, well, the thing is, on the internet, the people with more fringe ideas like a global warming denial, although I find it kind of weird to say that global warming denial is really a fringe idea, because I mean, the president is a global warming denier. He thinks it's like a hoax by the Chinese. The Senate is held by the Republican Party, and the Republican Party, by and large, deny that climate change exists, or they deny that it's man-made, which, you know, at this point, like, we can talk about which climate model is accurate in reflection of the terror of the situation. But to deny the truth that it is man-made altogether, you know, you're flying in the face of a ton of climate science. For what reason, really?
So here's the thing. I am not a climate scientist whatsoever. And all I know is math is hard, but I kind of view it this way. It's like, here's a vice, here's a pack of cigarettes. If I pull out a butt and I smoke a cigarette, I'm putting carbon and poison into my lungs. That's bad. However, with the power of science, we now know that if I just smoke a cigarette, it will do some damage to me. However, my body, which is currently a living creature, which I do think I am still regenerating cells at this point, it has the ability to heal. Just like our planet, we've thrown a bunch of smog and stuff in the atmosphere, but the sheer fact with how our ecosystem is set up, I mean, Mother Earth, we've been blessed with these oceans and tides and everything that were actually act as almost like a form of a carbon scrubber, that combined with different algae that we have naturally. I mean, because before volcanoes would erupt, that would block out the sun for periods of time and everything, but the Earth itself has the ability to scrub that. The issue we kind of start running into is, okay, we keep on putting carbon out there. Okay, is the planet able to process it at this rate? If it's not able to process this at this rate, what type of effect is it having to the ecosystem as a whole? Is it doing something negative? Is it perhaps causing, I don't know, certain things to maybe heat up a bit and adding, like, I don't know, trillions of metric tons of additional water into the actual Earth itself, raising the oceans? And I mean, these are things that you should probably consider, maybe take a look at.
So I want to address something Common Sense Guy is saying in the chat, where he says, should the countries that are polluting the most be pressured to do the most first? To an extent, I'd say yes, but the trouble is the two countries that pollute the most at the moment, like looking historically, I think would be America. But right now it's China, then America, then India. The trouble with doing it that way is that, well, first of all, China is a dictatorship. You know, it's kind of hard to put public pressure on them because they don't care. Like, they have complete control of their own people. They don't need, like, they're not going to listen to, you know, a bunch of climate activists trying to pressure them, unless, of course, you know, it's from within their own little clique, right? You know, from within the party. And since I'm not a member of the Chinese Communist Party, I'm not a high-ranking bureaucrat in China, there's not much I can do to get them to stop polluting. In India, sure, I guess, well, there's already tons of work that Indian activists are doing in their own country to change as much as they can. But right now, like, there is a very nationalist government run by this guy called Narendra Modi, who is actually being investigated on charges of inciting a genocide.
Was he the one that is he the current PM or president? I believe he had authorized some military action in the Kashmir area.
He's doing that too. So like he's been investigated previously for inciting a genocide, and now he's actively carrying out a genocide. So like if we can't even stop him from carrying out genocide against his own people, how are we supposed to pressure him to take action on climate change? Like, I mean, as like to address James Davis, yeah, that is China and India in regards to the third world. Those are the two biggest polluters in the third world. Aside from that, most third world countries don't pollute a ton, although I guess you could say Saudi Arabia, in which case, well, my answer would be stop sending the Saudis so much money when they clearly just, when I mean, I think like at this point we can safely say that Saudi Arabia did 9/11, or at least the money behind the operation came from high-ranking Saudi nobles.
I mean, these are, and again, I'm probably a little out of the loop. I'm seeing some article titles with quotes saying that Modi has, probably by via some of his actions. Some folks are referring to it as genocide. As far as Saudi Arabia, I mean, I believe 17 of the 19 hijackers did have Saudi state originations. I mean, you start delving into international law there. President Obama, you can disagree with what he said, but I mean, the fact that he was kind of fighting to not necessarily set precedent for, because as soon as you start suing folks internationally, that opens up the U.S. to being basically sued as well, which you're delving into things. I mean, we can go down that path. It's just you start entering uncharted territory at that point as well.
You know, you did this, well, you did that. Well, I guess it's true that we did that, but you also did this. Like it at the end of the day, I think most countries in the world have done horrible things, which I guess in some ways makes you can ask a question about, well, okay, why do we have all these powerful countries that are always doing these terrible things, and what's the benefit? Anyway, James Davis is saying, I mean the global south, such as the Amazon. Well, I mean, the Amazon is mainly under the control of Brazil, and Brazil elected the hard right president, Jair Bolsonaro, who previously said, well, you know, look, I'm in favor of the previous fascist military government. I think the military should overthrow the government. Like he's like, I don't like throwing the term fascist around as an insult, you know, as an easy descriptor of my opponent's political beliefs. But I think when you're saying, I want a military government, I want to run a military government, you are a fascist, you know? Like there has to be some point where you say that someone is a fascist.
I think we're kind of taking away from the ability of that. It's kind of like, I view it, at least in regards to President Trump, he's kind of like Godzilla, and you're kind of like using nuclear weapons. Well, those may work under most enemies and like opponents per se. It's just he takes things like that level of toxicity and everything, and it just kind of makes him grow stronger.
Bolsonaro's like Trump.
I don't know. I remember that he has used some very stern language. Again, I'm not really from Brazil. I'm looking at different things because I've heard people suggest before, as far as the Amazon goes, it's like, can we buy the rainforest and just kind of like make it a refuge? I'm looking at why we can't right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think a better solution would be to buy it and then turn it over to the indigenous people who populate the region, because I don't think they would treat it so abhorrently. I mean, right now they're doing as much as they can to protect their land, protect their forest from the colonizers that Bolsonaro has unleashed on them since he's started turning over more and more land and more of the Amazon over to development. I have to say, though, I think that every country in the world, you know, no matter if it's third world, first world, whatever, should do their part in climate change as much as they can. And I think it's, on some extent, it is a bit unfair because Europe and America and Canada did industrialize first. They are responsible for a huge amount of their carbon. So it is kind of unfair to ask, okay, India, who just started industrializing, you need to stop because you're going to destroy the environment. But at the same time, there's nothing we can really do, because if we don't stop, producing carbon, the world will be flooded to a certain extent.
Right, and that's kind of like, okay, we may have had a 150-year head start, and while we're in the process of transitioning off, we realize other folks aren't there. What I would say, and I'm really hoping it comes out within the next like 5 to 10 years, is the next generation of solar panels, in that the efficiency is going to be right around what it is now, if not greater, potentially even several times greater. But the cost of manufacturing and amount of resources required are far less. Basically, it's going to be almost like the printing press, where you're going to have like paper thin actual panels, where you're going to just literally have a printing press printing them out. It has to do with basically the alignment of the different carbon particles, and I think they utilize something called like buckyballs and stuff. But basically, it's a massive increase in efficiency, especially from a production aspect, that you could literally just put this on the sides of buildings. And if you could literally just, for a fraction of the cost of the current standard silicon arrays, do that, you just make the price per kilowatt hour just so much drastically cheaper. If we can reduce the price of electricity to something that's so negligible, I mean, why would folks even want to necessarily use carbon? We also delve into the fact that we're going to need better battery storage capacity, but I do think we can bridge the gaps. Maybe the answer is within thorium reactors, like I know Andrew Yang has been bringing up as well, because those are potential nuclear power. Once you get past the corrosion issues within the piping, basically you don't need to worry about the massive amounts of like uranium, yellow cake offshoot, and everything like that could go into proliferation of nuclear weapons.
Yeah, I'd say that the future of energy generation will have to come from not just one source, but technological progress on all these fronts. I think that every country should strive to have a diverse form of energy production, and they shouldn't rely on one source alone. Because if you do that, you're setting yourself up to, to have an Achilles heel, especially if you're a country that mainly relies on importing another country's energy sources. Like America in the 70s was extremely vulnerable to Saudi Arabia when they instituted that a ban on selling oil to any country that was involved in Israel's side in the Yom Kippur War. You saw fuel prices hike up dramatically, and there were shortages all over the country. Well, it's because America was completely dependent on one energy source, and particularly dependent on importing that one energy source. So in future, I think we need a diverse selection of energy sources. And yeah, I think nuclear energy should be on the table. And I'm not really a fan of that section of environmentalists that's, so obscenely concentrated on nuclear power and ending nuclear power that they start to forget about coal. Like I saw this absurd Greenpeace tweet where they were like, "Oh, good news! Vietnam shut down one of its nuclear plants." Well, what actually happened is they shut down nuclear plants and then reopened up 4 new coal plants in the same area.
And that's one of those things. It's maybe again, maybe it's just because of my particular upbringing, but I still remember the section, and I believe my social studies book, where it's like 1 ton of coal, 100 barrels of oil, 1 gram of uranium, all output the exact same amount of energy. I'm like, I understand we do need better ways to currently deal with primarily uranium based power plants, but at the same time, it's my alma mater. We had a nuclear reactor on campus. It's basically just cobalt 66. But I also did take classes with one of the professors and spent some time in and around there. So perhaps it's my life experience of kind of being around a particular similar style facility that maybe I have the additional confidence, especially knowing that most of these things, the way they're set up, there are ways to take care of it. I mean, again, the Fukushima plant it was a horrific series of events that I'm hoping have been properly set up, that we have more than just like 2 points of failure there. Like for something like that, with especially the fact that it's still going on right now, proper engineering and design and multiple fail safes are something that's required. And if we could get away from the potential worst case scenarios by pursuing thorium, I think that will be very useful as well as for all our friends over in Tenaris, because the thorium market will be surging. That was a wild reference for anybody that may be watching in the future.
Yeah. When it comes to nuclear power, I completely agree. Like investing more in research, investing more in ways that we can produce more energy with it, make it safer, make it less. Find ways that we can remove the uranium waste, so we don't have to deal with this toxic irradiated waste and the problem of where to dump it. But the one criticism I guess I have of like the whole pro-nuclear movement would be there are certain countries in certain areas where nuclear power plants just don't belong, and that's I think on fault lines, where the continental masses are rubbing up against each other, or near volcanoes, because it seems like a nuclear power plant is something where safety has to be the first concern. And if you have a nuclear power plant along a fault line, the danger of an earthquake upsetting the delicate balance is extremely high. Like there was that crisis in Japan and Fukushima that nearly caused a Chernobyl-like explosion, a nuclear meltdown. And
well, they're still dealing with the water cleanup. They just said, I think like a week or two ago, they might have to dump like tens of thousands of gallons of like completely radioactive water in the Pacific because they might not have anywhere to put it. Like that's something that's kind of concerning, I would say. I mean, I'm just,
mm-hmm. So
and we barely hear about it because it's not the absolute imminent thing that it was.
If you're an island nation on a fault line like Japan, I definitely agree. You need to scrap nuclear power. It's just not a model that can work for you. Its safety risk is too high.
I mean, the nuclear. What they ran into is they were right on the coast, and the fact that it was such a massive earthquake, and that particular plant, I don't believe it had undergone the final updates that I'm pretty sure were supposed to have been done years ago. Their diesel generators were only so far above. As soon as those were soaked, that was their fail safe. They hadn't had that extra series. And again, you kind of get back into how much carbon do you want to do. I'm going to stand by that. Between the new upcoming solar technology, once it starts getting rolled out, along with, I'm really interested in geothermal and new technology in that, just because that seems to be just such an abundant resource that regardless of whether the sun is shining all day or minimal hours of the day, if we had the ability to tap into, it's also we are kind of removing energy from the planet that may otherwise go into an earthquake or an eruption. That's just kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, geothermal power does seem interesting. Personally, I really like the thought of tidal power. I think definitely researching new and exciting ways of generating energy is another one of the many ways that technology is, can help us build a better future. But I think there's also the thing you have to remember about climate change, that it's not just like an individual problem where it's like, oh, well, some people are just so polluting, they're so greedy and selfish, and it just resulted in this big climate change problem. It is the problem of, say, 70%, like 70% of emissions, of global emissions, come from about 100 companies.
And just to kind of touch upon what James Davis says in the chat, he's thinking about thoughts on the carbon tax. Basically, kind of my concern that you can have there in many ways doesn't make a lot of sense. Yes. The thing you're going to run into, especially politically, is, and I kind of took this away when I was speaking with V.A. Shiva, when I got out a quick interview with him, because he's like, "Oh, climate change. Oh, it's this. It's the biggest lie and everything." I'm like, "All right," but I let him keep speaking and I let him finish his point. I'm like, "Okay, he kind of brought it around," and at the same time, I'm like, "Oh, So you view it as kind of like a revenue stream. Oh, those liberals getting a revenue stream, but it's like, oh, okay, but if it was a revenue stream, what's it for? It's designed to make sure we're not destroying like Mother Earth and everything. So like, is that necessarily a bad thing? Even if you look at it that way, the thing is, you're going to get so many conservatives that are just going to be so outraged and everything about that. It also in some ways can be regressive to like even like a small baker or something like that if they're trying to like build their business up and everything as well. I do think a lot of the technology, like when Lapis was talking about tidal, that actually excites me just because we see waves, it's constant motion. That's something that you can make power. I think a lot of it comes down to the transmission. The transmission and storage of power is going to be one of the next great frontiers for humanity, because as soon as we can start to increase efficiency at that I believe in turn will also help open up space exploration as well. Because as we can increase efficiency, because if we're going to do any type of project to invest in the infrastructure of the United States, I think upgrading their 60-year-old infrastructure for our power grid to be able to just get more efficiency out of it, as well as expand our transmission, that will help lower prices. So guess what? As the sun starts to go down here on the East Coast, we're still going to have actual places that have sun in the Midwest and the West Coast. And if we can transfer that like thousands of miles with minimal loss, guess what? We can rely more on green technology there as well. And again, it's just, I think these are exciting things that will bring more and more technology, because that allows us to access the power of the tides as well, be able to utilize the sun that may be up in a place hundreds of miles away. I mean, that's exciting stuff. Well, at least to me, I'm a nerd.
Yeah, but anyway, like another part of the trouble is it is kind of necessary for there to be some kind of regulation in order for there to tackle climate change. Like, I know conservatives don't really like regulation, but I don't know. Maybe I'm skeptical of the ability of the free market to just stop doing something that is making them so much money of their own accord.
Well, that's also probably why we haven't seen a lot of things going on right now, just because it's like, okay, we get so much money to do so many things. And I mean, you kind of see this with some of, let's say, the war on drugs as well, because it's like, okay, if a drug is truly a harm to society, if it is truly doing horrific things, okay, if we're going to have this be legal, I understand that. However, I'm like, people, including I think one of my old real estate bosses, went to jail for having a couple of joints on him. He's also one of the most honest, down-to-earth, and successful people I know as well. I'm like, if we're putting people in jail for smoking an herb, and the thing that really woke me up on this, I'm just like, at one point I was drinking and smoking with some friends, and I'm like, I wonder if they have pot for dogs. So I'm kind of looking it up. I'm like, oh, they do. I'm like, wait a second, you just put this thing in its water bowl. I'm like, this sounds familiar. Didn't I see a commercial on television for this? And there ended up being a television commercial I used to see on Comedy Central where you put this thing in the dog's water bowl, a couple of drops, and it would take away the dog's arthritis and stuff. And the active ingredient, I'm like, wait a second, what is this? NSAID? I'm like, this sounds familiar. It's the active ingredient in ibuprofen. I'm like, what do you know? And I'm like, wait a second. What's the difference between these two things? Okay, so the one that's made in the lab for a 30-day supply is about $90 for a 1-month supply. The one that comes from a plant that grows in the ground is about $35. I'm like, oh, so the thing made in a lab is $90, and the marijuana equivalent is approximately a third of the price. I'm like, no wonder this stuff is illegal. People are making billions.
Well, yeah, but not only lock up tens of thousands of people in private prisons for small crimes, and if you have, something like a 3 strikes and you're out policy, you could go to prison for life for 3 drug possession violations.
California tried that. It just,
you can pay like $2, 2 cents. It's obscene how little some of these companies in private prisons pay their workers to work for life, and it's very difficult for them to organize, because I don't think prisoners in the United States have the right to organize or the right to form unions.
Well, they're technically slaves. Like, we we seriously need to increase the reduction of we basically should probably actually end slavery here in the United States, because under the 13th Amendment, we outlawed slavery with the exception of if you're convicted of crimes. So like that's a common misconception, and I'm like, how many years has it been? Why is this? This is like a number of these other laws that we see. It's like the sheer fact it's like depending on who a person loves, they could potentially lose their job. It's like, okay, rather than arguing why do these laws, why are they still there? Why haven't these been trimmed from the books? Like I don't know. If you're going to be, is it just because we incentivize public officials to tell us what they've done for us recently as far as new things, rather than saying, oh yeah, all these laws are like 180 years old here that don't really have a point anymore. We're just kind of clearing them out of the books because it's not necessary and it's also discriminatory.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think that I agree with you. Private prisons in the United States basically are slavery, and even slave labor within public prisons. Just something that needs to go. It really should be simple to get everyone on board to just remove that little exception, except for slave labor. However, there is a problem, and that problem is that a lot of companies love having cheap labor where they can pay their employees $2 or something, or their slaves $2 or something to mass produce goods. And then they can use that money that they've made, they can set aside a part of it to send lobbyists to Washington. And those lobbyists can then lobby officials to keep those laws on the books in perpetuity.
This is the thing that got me. And again, I have spoken to some folks, and I have heard some folks that have worked within the prison system say that private prisons, as far as overall operation, tend to be better, at least from an employee aspect. I have heard that, and again, minimal sourcing, but the sheer fact that, okay, I put myself, as you were talking about those lobbyist lappets, I'm like, okay, if you're going to be lobbying for a particular industry, like if you're going for agriculture or something, you want to make sure that it's going to be beneficial to the growing of crops or raising of livestock or something along those lines. It's going to be related to the industry. How does one advocate for the prison industry? Well, how does a prison make money? It makes money based upon the number of butts in cells. Mm-hmm. So in order to lobby for that, you need to lobby for things that are going to maximize the number of butts in jail. It just that sheer fact that I state it like that, that just seems to have so many things wrong with it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, why are we incentivizing locking people up in cells? Why are we incentivizing punishing people? It's a bit weird, isn't it?
Well, I think a lot of times it's what is a prison or jail for? I mean, the sheer fact I'm basically using these interchangeably. I don't know. Is there a difference? Is it just about sentencing time? And I've heard folks say the reason why we put people in jail is to remove threats from society. I've heard that. I also hear folks that, again, depending on what happens, we should try to help people, because we all do stupid things. I've made mistakes that, you know what, if I wasn't as lucky, I could easily have been in jail. I could easily have a record as well. So it's like, I can acknowledge these things. So it's like, if that happened to me, if I was in that position, how would I like to be treated? If I really screw up, it's like, I get it. No, you can punish me and stuff like that. But if it's something where, okay, you screwed up, we would like you, upon your time and debt to society being paid, to reemerge and try to contribute to society. And I think we've also put a very strong stigma on that, for the fact that if somebody has a screw up, they feel like their entire professional life is over. And that's something I think we're starting to work past.
Yeah, I feel like more and more people are getting, are understanding the need for some sort of criminal justice reform in the United States. And I'm very glad to hear that, because I think the United States has the most people in jail of any country in the world as regards to percentage of their population.
It's I remember there was a segment from the newsroom, and at one point he said, I think it was Jeff Daniels said, the United States only leads the world in two categories: number of adults who believe angels are real and number of incarcerated citizens per capita. I believe it was something like that. And it's like, whoa, you just completely trashed the country. At
Yeah.
the same time, he followed up with, it didn't used to be that way. We actually used to fight wars on poverty, not poor people. And he actually like builds it up. And that's how I kind of see, like, at least in my world of watching HBO and Showtime,
Yeah.
how the news I would like it to be, trying to at least like cut through, cover stories that are important. And I don't know, maybe it's just wishful thinking.
No, I think that I think I've heard that speech before. I've never actually seen Newsroom the show, but I think that speech is fairly popular because I think the newscaster was asked and he gave kind of like an answer that was offensive to some Americans, where on the TV show, where he was like, what's the thing you love most about America, or something? Why is America the greatest country in the world?
He went from giving a canned standard, like, political answers, like, no, I want a human moment. And then just at that point, whether it was his epilepsy medicine or his former girlfriend out there in the seats kind of prodding him on a little bit, he's like, it's not the greatest country in the world, professor. And then, like, well, what about the people? And then he just goes off onto like the right-wing commentator, and then he just starts taking the piss out of the left-wing commentator, and he's just going over, bringing up like issues that like have been brought up. And then it's, I mean, I love the show. I mean, that's me personally, but no, I hear what you're saying. But it's like, yeah, there are actual issues out there, and as you were saying earlier, a lot of times it seems like we kind of just get into within a lot of our own echo chambers where, well, I mean, if these are the people that we know and trust, I mean, well, yeah, is it a surprise we're going to be having a lot of the same arguments or a lot of the same reference points of a lot of these folks? That's why I do believe diversity is a strength. We should get out there, learn from different cultures, and sometimes folks that we disagree with. Because even if you're just going to look at it from even the context of political rivals per se, I believe there's a wise man by the name of Sun Tzu that said something about like knowing thy enemy or rival as well as I know thyself or something.
Sun Tzu.
I don't know. Did he write The Art of War or something? I probably should read it.
Well, I think it's pretty long, but I'm not sure how well the translation holds up.
That's also another fair point as well.
Yeah. Let's see. Where were we? Was it? Honestly, I feel like very satisfied with this conversation. I feel like it's been very productive. We haven't gone into accusing each other and starting, throwing out a bunch of buzzwords about everyone else's beliefs.
What a novel idea! I mean, having like actual civil discourse. I mean, it's Lapis. I think we might be onto something.
Well, maybe we will be able to progress with that, like in the coming weeks. Like, I think I will definitely want to have you on again on my channel because I think this has gone really well. I am starting to look at wrapping things up because
we've been going for a while.
Yeah, we've been going for about 2 hours, and I'm at a certain point. When I feel like a conversation has come to a good end, it feels unnecessary to kind of like drag it out. But honestly, I probably could talk to you for like another 2 or 3 hours, and I wouldn't mind.
No, I appreciate it, but no, 2 hours, especially within the greater YouTube algorithms, it's right around the time that works very well for a lot of the engagement, apparently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard a lot of things about this algorithm. It's all the kids on the street are talking about it.
Oh, the algorithm, and what a web we weave. Actually, that would be an interesting conversation for another day, I feel.
Anyway, thank you very much for having on. I will link your channel in the description and your Twitter account and my Twitter account. I'll link that as well. Thanks for coming on. Once again, it's been a pleasure. And for all of you in the audience, I will see you next week. Ta-ta for now.
Thank you for having me. Peace out.